My name is Vanessa Cole, and I knew my husband was cheating on me for 367 days before I said a single word about it. Not because I was weak. Not because I was scared. Not because I loved him so much I couldn't face the truth. I knew for 367 days because I needed exactly that long to make sure that when the moment finally came, when I finally looked Nathan Cole in the eyes and showed him what I knew and what I'd done about it, he would have absolutely nothing left to stand on. I wanted him broke in every sense of the word. Financially. Emotionally. In front of every person who had ever watched him treat me like I was lucky to have him. So I waited. I smiled. I cooked dinner. I asked about his day. I slept beside him in our bed for 367 nights, and every single morning I woke up and went to work, not the job he knew about, not the quiet, careful life he thought I was living, but the other work. The secret work. The work that was going to change everything. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the night it started. The night I stopped being Nathan Cole's wife and started being something he never saw coming. It was a Saturday in September, 13 months ago. Nathan had told me he was playing golf with his friend Derek. He said it at breakfast, casually, like he'd said it 100 times before, because Derek was the name he used when he needed an alibi that nobody would check. I know that now. I didn't know it then. I just thought my husband was playing golf on a Saturday morning and would be home by 3, and I had the whole day to myself, which I planned to spend cleaning out the garage and maybe finally hanging the pictures we'd bought in Savannah 2 years ago that was still leaning against the hallway wall. I was in the garage at 11:15 when I realized I'd left my phone inside. I went back in through the kitchen door. I picked up my phone from the counter. And I heard his voice. Not a call. He wasn't on his phone. His voice, coming from upstairs. Which made no sense because Nathan had left 2 hours ago. I had watched him back out of the driveway. I had waved from the porch. I stood in the kitchen and I listened. And then I heard the second voice. A woman's voice. In my house. In my bedroom. On a Saturday morning while I was cleaning out the garage 30 feet away. I want you to sit with that for a second. I want you to understand the specific, suffocating intimacy of that detail. That she was not in a hotel, not in his car, not in some apartment across town. She was in my house. In the bedroom, I had painted the color I chose from a sample card I'd carried around for 2 weeks. Sleeping in sheets I had washed and folded and put back on the bed. I stood in my kitchen and my body went through something I don't have adequate words for. Not anger. Anger is too simple for what I felt. Something more like a full system shutdown. Like every circuit in me tripped at once, and for a few seconds I was just standing there in the silence of a house that was lying to my face. Then the circuits came back on. One by one. Clean. Cold. Precise. I set my phone down on the counter. Very quietly. I walked back through the kitchen door. I went back to the garage. I picked up the broom I'd been using. And I kept cleaning. Because I had understood something in those 30 seconds in the kitchen, something that would define the next 367 days of my life. And it was this: if I walked up those stairs right now, I would get one moment. One loud, terrible, honest moment that would be over in 20 minutes and change nothing permanently in my favor. Or I could wait. I could be smart. I could make it count. I chose to make it count. I have to tell you who I was before Nathan, because you need to understand why I gave up. Not for him. I want to be clear about that. I gave it up for us, for what I believed we were building, and that distinction matters even when the result looks the same from the outside. My name before I married was Vanessa Okafor. My parents came to the United States from Lagos, Nigeria in 1987, 5 years before I was born, and they built a life in Columbus, Ohio, with the specific ferocity of people who understand exactly what they left behind and exactly what they came for. My father ran a small accounting firm. My mother taught middle school mathematics for 22 years. They worked with a discipline that felt, growing up, less like ambition and more like love for the life they were making, love for what they wanted me to inherit. I inherited the math brain. That's what my mother always said, the girl got the math brain. I got full scholarship to Ohio State, graduated with a degree in finance, went to work at a mid-size investment firm in Columbus at 23, and was running my own book of client accounts by 26. I was good at my job in the particular way that people are good at things they were built for. Not effortfully good, but naturally, intuitively good, the way water is good at finding the lowest point. I met Nathan at a charity gala in downtown Columbus in 2015. He was 32, tall, handsome in a way that photographs well, the kind of man who enters a room and immediately understands where the center of gravity is and positions himself near it. He was in commercial real estate, successful, driven, confident without being arrogant. Or so I thought. Looking back, I think what I mistook for confidence without arrogance was just arrogance that had learned to dress itself up for the right audience. We dated for 2 years. We got engaged in Santorini. Yes, he did that. He was thorough in his romantic gestures, which I've come to understand is a skill some men develop specifically because it purchases them significant amounts of goodwill they can draw down later. We got married in June of 2018, 140 people. My mother cried twice, my father danced badly and beautifully, and I stood in a garden in Columbus in a dress I still consider one of the most beautiful things I've ever worn, and I believed, with my whole chest, in the life we were starting. 2 years into the marriage, Nathan asked me to consider leaving my job. It was framed gently. His real estate business was expanding. He was moving into development, bigger projects, more demanding. He needed a partner at home, he said, someone to manage the household and the social calendar and the dinners that were increasingly part of how he built relationships with investors and clients. He wasn't asking me to give up my career forever, he said. Just to step back. Just for now. We were talking about starting a family. It made sense. I left my job. I want you to notice how that sentence sits. 4 words. I left my job. After 7 years of building something I was genuinely exceptional at. After 7 years of my own income, my own clients, my own professional identity. 4 words, spoken in a Columbus kitchen over a dinner he'd made specifically for that conversation. He was thoughtful that way, in the engineering of moments, and just like that, I was no longer Vanessa Okafor with the math brain and the client book and the career trajectory that had never once plateaued. I was Nathan Cole's wife. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself that for 3 years. What happened in those 3 years is a story I could spend an hour on and still not fully explain, because it wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. So quiet. Nathan was a good husband in most of the visible ways. He remembered our anniversary. He bought thoughtful gifts. He told people at dinner parties that Vanessa was the smartest person in the room, said it with a pride that looked genuine. In public, in front of other people, he was exactly the husband that everyone assumed I was lucky to have. In private, it was different. Not cruel, I want to be fair. Not abusive in any way I can point to and name. But there was a gradual, patient, systematic way in which he made the financial decisions alone. The investment decisions. The decisions about when we traveled and where and how much was spent. He managed all of it, and when I asked questions or pushed back or suggested something he hadn't already decided, there was a way he had of responding that wasn't dismissal exactly. It was softer than dismissal, but had the same effect. My ideas would land and then sink quietly, like stones in still water. Gone without argument. Just gone. I noticed it. I kept noticing it. I told myself I was being unfair. He was the one working. He was the one building. He had more context on the finances than I did now that I wasn't working. I had more context on the finances than he could ever imagine. He'd just forgotten that. Or maybe he never fully believed it in the first place. By year 3, I had shrunk in ways I couldn't fully measure because I was inside the shrinking. My confidence in my own financial judgment, the thing I had been most certain of, the thing I was most built for, had gone quiet in a way I mistook for contentment and was actually erosion. I second-guessed things I once would have known instantly. I deferred to him on matters I once would have led. The math brain was still there. But it had stopped being asked for, and things that stop being asked for eventually stop volunteering. That was who I was on the September Saturday when I heard his voice upstairs. That was who I was standing in the garage holding a broom, with a cold, electric clarity moving through me for the first time in 3 years. And that woman, the one who had been eroded, who had been quieted, who had made herself manageable so the marriage could stay comfortable, she looked around the garage, and she looked at the broom in her hands, and she made a decision that no one in my life would have predicted. She put the broom down. She went inside. She opened her laptop. And Vanessa Okafor came back to work. The first thing I did was call my college roommate, Diane Chen, who was a family law attorney in Cincinnati. I called her from my car, parked 2 streets away from the house, 20 minutes after I'd gone back to the garage. She answered on the 3rd ring and I said, "Diane, I need to know exactly what I'm entitled to in the state of Ohio if I file for divorce, and I need to know it today." Silence for a second. Then she said, "How long?" I said, "I don't know yet. I just found out." She said, "Come to Cincinnati this weekend. Don't say anything to him. Not a word." I said, "I know." She said, "Vanessa, do you hear me? Not one word." I said, "Diane, I'm the one who told you that." She laughed, a small surprised laugh. And then she got serious and started talking, and I sat in my car 2 streets from my house and took notes on my phone in the calm, focused way of a woman who has just remembered exactly who she is. The plan took shape over the following 3 weeks, in calls with Diane and a financial forensics consultant she recommended named Robert Ash, who specialized in exactly the kind of asset discovery that becomes relevant when one spouse has controlled the finances exclusively for several years and the other spouse suspects the picture they've been shown is not the full picture. Robert was quiet and methodical and brilliant, and within 4 weeks he had confirmed what my own gut had been telling me for longer than I wanted to admit. Nathan's financial life was considerably more complex than the version he'd shared with me. There were accounts I hadn't known about. Investment positions I hadn't been shown. A real estate LLC structured in a way that would require careful unraveling. None of this surprised me. I had a math brain. I had always known the numbers didn't add up the way he presented them. I had just stopped trusting my own knowledge enough to push. I wasn't going to make that mistake again. While Robert built the financial picture, I was building something else entirely. Quietly. In the margins of the life Nathan thought I was living. I called 3 former colleagues from my investment firm days. People who had watched me work, who knew what I was capable of, who had always, quietly, thought it was a waste when I left. I didn't tell them everything. I told them I was considering a return to financial work, independent consulting, and would they be interested in being a reference or potentially a first client. All 3 said yes within 48 hours. I registered an LLC in my maiden name, Okafor Financial Strategies, using an address at a shared office space in downtown Columbus. I built a website. I rewrote my professional profile. I reached back through 7 years of dormant contacts and started, one by one, reactivating them. Nathan noticed nothing. Why would he? I was home when he left and home when he returned. Dinner was made. The house was clean. When he talked about his day, I listened and asked questions. When his clients came for dinner, I was warm and gracious and said exactly the right things, and I watched them across the table and noted which of them might eventually find my services useful and filed it away. I smiled at my husband every single day. I kissed him goodbye every single morning. And every single morning, after his car left the driveway, I sat down at my desk and went to work dismantling the life he thought he had built around me. By month 4, Okafor Financial Strategies had its first paying client, a real estate developer, which I found darkly funny, who needed help restructuring his investment portfolio after a bad year. $15,000 for a 3-month engagement. Nathan thought I'd been taking a wellness course. I let him think that. By month 7, I had 4 clients and monthly revenue that had exceeded what I'd been making at the investment firm in my last year there. The math brain doesn't atrophy, it turns out. It just waits. And when it comes back online after years of being underused, it comes back angry in the best possible way, hungry and sharp and completely unwilling to second-guess itself. Robert Ashe delivered his final report in month 8. It was 43 pages. I read every word. Then I called Diane and told her we were ready to move. She said, "Are you sure? Once we file." I said, "I've been sure since September." But we didn't file yet. Because there was one more thing I wanted. One specific thing that had nothing to do with the law and everything to do with the particular kind of justice that money and attorneys cannot fully deliver. I wanted Nathan to be standing in a room full of people who respected him when it happened. I wanted witnesses. I wanted the version of himself he performed for the world to be present when the performance ended. And as it happened, his company's annual investor dinner was scheduled for the second Saturday in October. I had 11 months. I had built everything I needed to build. And I had been smiling at my husband for 365 days. 2 more days felt easy. The investor dinner was held at the Myronova Ballroom in downtown Columbus. It was the kind of event Nathan lived for. 60 people, all of them wealthy, most of them influential, a room full of the relationships he had spent years cultivating. He wore his best suit. He was electric that night, working the room the way he always worked rooms, full of the specific confidence of a man who has never seriously questioned whether he belongs. I wore a dress I had bought 3 weeks earlier. Deep green. The kind of dress that doesn't ask for attention, it commands it quietly. My mother had seen it on a video call and said, "Vanessa, that's a statement." I said, "I know, Mama. That's the idea." We arrived together. We circulated together, for a while, the practiced social unit of a successful married couple. I smiled at people I'd met at previous events, was introduced to a few I hadn't. Nathan's hand was at the small of my back in the proprietary way he had, the way that said she's with me more than it said I love her, and I stood inside that gesture and felt nothing except the calm of someone at the very end of a very long plan. About an hour into the evening, I excused myself to the restroom. I took a different route back. I found the event coordinator and had a brief, quiet conversation with her. She looked at me for a moment, then nodded. I returned to Nathan's side. 40 minutes later, dinner was served and we were seated at the main table with 4 of his most significant investors and their spouses. Nathan was to my left. Across from us were a couple named Bill and Sandra Hargrove. Bill was Nathan's largest single investor, had backed him for years, considered Nathan not just a business relationship but a friend. Nathan gave his annual remarks after the main course. He was polished and warm and specific about the year's results, about the projects in development, about the future he was building. He thanked his team. He thanked his investors. And then he turned to me, in front of 60 people, and said, "And most of all, I want to thank my wife, Vanessa, who holds everything together at home so that I can do what I do out here." He raised his glass. To Vanessa. 60 people raised their glasses. I smiled. I let them drink. Then I stood up. Nathan looked up at me, surprised. This wasn't part of any program. I said, "I actually have a few things I'd like to say as well, if that's all right." The room went quiet with the particular attention of people who sense, on an animal level, that something unscripted is happening. I said, "I want to thank Nathan too, because the last year has genuinely changed my life." While Nathan was building his business, I had the opportunity to rebuild mine. Many of you may not know that before I became Nathan's wife, I spent 7 years in financial investment consulting. I was good at it. I missed it. I looked around the room, at the investors, at Bill Hargrove, at the faces turning toward me. 8 months ago, I relaunched my practice. Okafor Financial Strategies. We've brought in over $400,000 in our first 8 months of operation, with clients across real estate, healthcare, and private equity. I paused. I say this not to compete with Nathan, but because he thanked me for holding things together at home, and I want to be accurate. I've been holding things together at home and building a 6-figure consultancy simultaneously. I thought the full picture deserved to be in the room. The silence was extraordinary. The specific, loaded silence of 60 people recalibrating. Nathan's face was very still. I looked at him. Right at him. And I said, calmly and clearly and with 11 months of extraordinary patience behind every word, "I also want to say that I'll be filing for divorce on Monday morning. I've retained counsel. The financial disclosure process is already underway." I set my napkin on the table. "I wish you all a wonderful evening." I picked up my clutch. I pushed my chair in. And I walked out of the Myronova ballroom in my deep green dress while 60 people sat in the most complete silence I have ever created in my life. I will not pretend the months that followed were easy, because this is a true story and true stories don't end at the ballroom door. The divorce was hard. Nathan fought it, as I knew he would, the way people fight when they believe they are in control right up until they aren't. His attorney pushed back on Robert Ash's financial discovery, challenged the asset valuations, tried to reframe the LLC structures in ways more favorable to Nathan. It took 14 months. There were days and depositions where I sat across from Nathan and his attorney and felt the specific exhaustion of someone who has been doing battle for so long the battle has become the weather. But Diane was extraordinary. Robert was thorough. And I had documentation. 2 years of his financial statements cross-referenced against what he disclosed to me, against the accounts we jointly held, against the shadow picture Robert had built over 8 months. Nathan's attorney eventually stopped pushing on the financials because there was nowhere left to push. We settled in December of the following year. I received my equitable share of the marital assets, which were considerably larger than Nathan had ever presented to me. The beach house in the Outer Banks that I hadn't known existed. The investment account in Delaware. My share of the equity in the Columbus house we'd shared. I kept Okafor Financial Strategies entirely. The total picture was more than I'll say here publicly, but I will tell you that I sat in Diane's office after the settlement was signed and I did the math in my head, the way I've always done math, quickly and accurately and without a calculator, and I sat with that number for a moment and felt something that wasn't triumph exactly. It was justice. The quiet, specific, lasting kind. The kind that doesn't need an audience. I'd already had my audience. People ask me about the ballroom moment. They always want to know about the ballroom moment. Was it planned exactly that way? Did I rehearse it? Was I nervous? Did I see his face? Yes. Yes. No. Yes. I saw his face. I watched it in my peripheral vision as I stood up and spoke. I watched the stillness come over it. Not anger, not yet. Anger came later, but in that moment, just stillness. The stillness of a man whose world has just rearranged itself in public, and who doesn't yet have language for what just happened. I don't feel proud of it. Exactly. I want to be honest about that. I feel satisfied, I think, in the way you feel satisfied when something that was out of alignment is finally, precisely aligned. The ballroom moment was not about humiliating Nathan for sport. It was about one specific thing, reclaiming the narrative. He had spent for years defining me to that room as the woman who holds things together at home. I walked into that room every year and played that role with him and smiled while he took the credit and poured the wine, and no one in that room knew who I actually was. Now they knew. That was all I wanted. To be known. I am now 37 years old. Okafor Financial Strategies has 7 team members and clients in 4 states and annual revenue that has cleared $2 million. I work out of an office in downtown Columbus with my name on the door. My name, my maiden name, the name my parents brought from Lagos to Ohio and gave to a girl with a math brain and a future they worked themselves to the bone to make possible. I called my mother the week the settlement finalized. She picked up on the first ring. I told her the number. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, in the specific way my mother has of saying things that sound simple but land deep, Vanessa. Your father and I did not cross an ocean so you could disappear inside someone else's life. I said, I know, Mama. I'm back. She said, good. Come for dinner Sunday. I'll make jollof. I came for dinner Sunday. The jollof was perfect. My father told the same 3 stories he always tells, and I laughed at all of them exactly as if I'd never heard them before, because that's what you do when you love someone and time has felt short and you understand now, more than you did before, that the ordinary Sunday dinners are not the background of life. They are the life. I want to speak directly to you, whoever you are, wherever you are listening to this, because I think some of you are sitting inside something right now and you know what it is and you don't yet know what to do with the knowing. Maybe you heard that voice upstairs. Maybe you saw the name on the screen. Maybe you haven't found concrete proof yet, but your body has been sending you a signal for a long time and you have been choosing, every morning, not to receive it. I am not here to tell you what to do. Leaving a marriage is one of the most complicated decisions a human being can make, and it is never as simple as someone else's story makes it look. Even mine. Even this one that I've just told you. What looks, in the telling, like a clean line from discovery to plan to execution was, in the living, full of nights I lay awake in a bed next to a man I was still, in some exhausted corner of myself, hoping might be different. Full of mornings I looked at my laptop screen and thought, who are you fooling? Vanessa, who do you think you are? What I want to tell you is what got me through those nights and those mornings. It was not anger. Anger is fuel, but it burns unclean and it doesn't last. It was not revenge. Revenge is a destination, but it's not a direction. What got me through was this, the knowledge, the bone-deep, unshakable knowledge, that I was Vanessa Okafor before I was Nathan Cole's wife. That the woman I had been was still in there, still intact, still fully capable, still holding the whole of what she had built before she set it down for someone who didn't deserve the sacrifice. She was still there. Waiting. Patient. Ready. I just had to go back and get her. And so do you. Whatever you set down, your career, your confidence, your financial independence, your sense of your own intelligence, your trust in your own instincts, it is still there. It did not evaporate because someone made you feel like it wasn't worth anything. It is sitting exactly where you left it, collecting interest. Go pick it up. Go remember who you were before you became someone's supporting role. Go build the thing you've been carrying around in the back of your mind for years, the thing you have 12 reasons why the timing isn't right for, the thing you keep almost starting and then talking yourself out of. Start it. Build it quietly if you have to. Build it at 5 in the morning and at 11 at night and in the parking lot of a coffee shop on your phone if that's all the space you have. Build it in secret if the people around you would discourage it. Build it with the specific, concentrated fury of a woman who has been underestimated and is not interested in correcting that impression until the moment she is ready. And when the moment comes, when you are standing in your own ballroom, metaphorical or otherwise, and the room goes quiet and every face turns toward you, say it clearly. Say your name. Your real name. The one that was there before. That name is the whole story. That name is everything. My name is Vanessa Okafor Cole. And I was always the most dangerous person in that room. They just forgot to check. There's a detail I left out. One I've never said publicly before, because it belongs to me, and some things you keep just for yourself until you decide you're ready to let them go. The woman who was in my house that September morning, her name was Kristen. I found that out in month 2, from a receipt Nathan had carelessly left in his coat pocket, from a restaurant in Cincinnati where he told me he had a business dinner. I looked her up the way you look up anything you don't want to know and can't stop yourself from finding. She was 30, a marketing coordinator at a firm in Cincinnati, and she was pretty in the way of someone who has never been asked to be anything else, and I do not say that with cruelty. I say it with the exhausted recognition of a woman who spent years being underestimated and knows exactly what it looks like when a man chooses someone he thinks will be easier to manage. I never contacted her. Not once. Never sent a message, never showed up anywhere, never made her part of my story because she wasn't. She was Nathan's choice, Nathan's lie, Nathan's chapter to own. The person who wronged me was Nathan. She owed me nothing because she was not my husband. I kept that boundary clean because I am my mother's daughter and my mother raised me to understand that your integrity is the only thing that remains fully yours when everything else is contested. I heard through a mutual acquaintance, about 8 months after the divorce finalized, that Nathan and Kristen had ended things. That he was living alone in a rental in Dublin, Ohio, a suburb north of Columbus, and had lost 2 of his major investors, including Bill Hargrove, in the aftermath of the ballroom evening. I don't know if that's entirely true or partly embellished the way information always gets embellished when it travels. I didn't pursue the details. What I know is this: I ran into Bill Hargrove at a charity event in Columbus in the spring, about a year after everything. He's in his 60s, white-haired, the kind of old money Columbus that is genuinely old and genuinely modest about it. He saw me across the room and crossed to me immediately and shook my hand and said, "Vanessa, I owe you an apology." I said, "You don't owe me anything, Bill." He said, "I should have seen it. I watched that man take credit for you for 4 years at my dinner table, and I never once asked the right questions. That's on me." I looked at him. At this man who had funded Nathan's career for a decade, who had raised a glass to me as the woman who holds things together at home, who had watched me walk out of that ballroom and sat in the silence I left behind. I said, "Ask the right questions going forward. That's all I'd want from you." He nodded slowly. Then he said, "My firm is looking for a financial strategy consultant. Someone senior. I'd like to send you a brief if you're open to it." I said I was open to it. That engagement became Okafor Financial Strategy's largest single contract of the year. I think about that sometimes, the circular, almost architectural neatness of it. The man who watched Nathan diminish me for 4 years, who raised a glass to my diminishment, who then watched me walk back into my own name, that man became the source of the opportunity that took my company to the next level. Not as an apology. Not as charity. As a business decision made by someone who had finally done the right thing and asked the right question. There's a lesson in there somewhere about the economy of rooms. About who's actually paying attention. About how the most consequential reputation you can build in any room is not the loudest one or the most polished one, but the most true one. The one that can walk out of a ballroom in a green dress and leave 60 people sitting in silence, and still, months later, have the work speak for itself. My father called me on my 37th birthday. He called at 7 in the morning, which is when he always calls, because he has never once in his life been late to anything, including a phone call. He said happy birthday in Yoruba first and then in English, the way he always does, the way that has always felt like being held by two things at once, where you came from and where you are. I was standing at my kitchen window with my coffee, looking out at Columbus in early morning light, at a city that has been mine in different ways across different years of my life. My father said, "Are you happy?" I thought about it. Not the quick answer, the real one. I said, "Yes, Dad. I really am." He said, "Good." That was always the goal. And then, because he is my father and cannot help himself, also the business numbers look good. Your mother showed me the article. I laughed. "You're tracking my revenue, Dad?" He said, "I'm an accountant, Vanessa. I track everything." We talked for 20 minutes. About Columbus, about my brother in Atlanta, about the garden my mother had expanded this year into territory that my father claimed was previously his domain and my mother claimed was always hers. About nothing, really. About everything that counts. After I hung up, I stood at the window for a long time. I thought about the September morning. The garage. The broom. The 30 seconds in the kitchen when the circuits tripped and came back on cold and clean and precise. I thought about 367 days of silence that was never passive, never afraid, never anything less than the most focused work of my life. I thought about the ballroom. The green dress. The moment the room went quiet and 60 faces turned toward me. I thought about my name. My real name. The one my parents carried across an ocean and gave to a girl they believed in before she had done a single thing to deserve it, and then spent the rest of their lives watching her deserve it, quietly, thoroughly, on her own terms. Vanessa Okafor. That name was always the whole story. I just had to remember it was mine. One final thing. After the settlement was finalized, after the last document was signed and the accounts separated and the beach house in the Outer Banks was properly accounted for, I drove to my parents' house on a Sunday. I sat at my mother's kitchen table and I ate jollof rice and fried plantain and my father's terrible pepper soup that he insists on making himself once a year and that we all pretend is better than it is. And after dinner, my mother brought out a bottle of wine she had been saving. A good one. She wouldn't tell me for what occasion she had originally bought it, but I suspect she had been saving it for exactly this. She poured 3 glasses. She handed one to my father. One to me. She held hers up. She said, in Yoruba, the thing her own mother used to say. The thing her mother had said when my parents left Lagos, when the future was uncertain and the destination was an ocean away, and the only thing that was certain was who they were and what they were made of. It translates, roughly, to this. The one who knows her own worth does not wait to be valued. She builds the table and then she sits at the head of it. We drank. Outside, Columbus was doing what Columbus does on Sunday evenings in the fall, going quiet in the specific, amber way of Midwestern cities at the end of October, light going golden through the leaves, the whole world taking a long exhale before the week begins again. I sat at my mother's kitchen table and I felt exactly the right size. Not bigger than I was. Not smaller. Exactly the size of a woman who knows her name and has earned, in the hardest possible way, the right to say it without apology. That's all any of us are really after. That, and maybe a table good enough to sit at the head of. Mine's ready. I built it myself. My name is Vanessa Okafor. And this is how I came home to myself.